cancer research in the country, we should be spending $20 billion. And I don't care whether we go into further deficit because of that, because if we cure cancer, the sooner we do it, then we will save trillions of dollars going forward. And so I think we really have to intensify, increase our efforts in medical research, because ultimately that is part of the answer to solving our healthcare crisis. We also have a lot of other issues like nutrition, preventive care, early childhood care, all of these things that are costly, but they are, in the grand scheme of things, much less costly than treating people for diseases at the terminal end of the disease, or at the most expensive end. So we need to be spending money to make sure every child has care, that we have preventive medicine, that we do much better with nutrition, because the vast majority of diabetes is caused by bad personal consumption habits. And these are all things that we need to work on to approach our medical issue. So that's as much as I'm going to talk about in that question. Second question. How do you view the role of the federal government in assisting with affordability of education on a college level, and B, Kentucky's serious educational problems involving class size, teacher shortages, dropout rates, and progress assessments for those students who fall short on diagnostic tests? Two important education questions. I am on the Education and Labor Committee. As Linda mentioned, I was honored to be selected as the outstanding new member of Congress last year for my work on education. And it's the area in which I devoted most of my energies during my first term. The federal government has an enormous role in higher education and in college affordability. We just passed the Higher Education Act reauthorization. First time in 10 years it had been reauthorized. I'll be a little bit partisan here. We are in a campaign season. The Republican Congress failed to, even though it expired 5 years ago, the Republican Congress failed to renew or reauthorize the Higher Education Act, in spite of the fact that tuition over the last few years across the country has risen 30-something% just in 5 years. We know in Kentucky alone, we've had years where it's 8, 9, 10% increases each year. The federal government had not acted. We acted in a major way this year, and I was very pleased that not only did we get a bipartisan bill passed through the Congress, but the president actually signed one. So, and I was also proud to have had 6 different provisions that I authored in that bill. One of them goes directly to the issue of college affordability. It also goes to the issue of what we do to help our overall education system. Because one of the things we're having a great deal of trouble in is attracting teachers to the profession and keeping teachers in teaching. My provision provides for $2,000 in loan forgiveness, student loan forgiveness, for every year that a person spends in what we call public service careers, teaching being one of them, nursing, social work, so a fairly long list. Right now, there is a student loan forgiveness program on the books, but you have to work for 10 years to take advantage of it. My idea was, let's provide the incentive early on in their careers. First of all, when their salaries are lowest and they need more help. Secondly, as an incentive to keep them in the profession. So now if you're a teacher and you teach for 1 year, you get $2,000 of your student loan forgiven. Up to 5 years or $10,000 total forgiveness. That's in the bill that I authored, and it's now part of the law. But the biggest thing we did this year was, actually in this Congress, was last year. We passed the College Cost Reduction Act, where we provided $21 billion additional student aid for students to go to college. This is a critically important thing for our society. We know that we need to get more people through higher education. 85% of the jobs in this country right now, not to speak of going forward, 85% of the jobs right now require education beyond high school. So we have to make college more accessible and more affordable to a broader range of the public. So we worked on this. We expanded the Pell Grant system. We raised the limits from $4,000 to $5,100. We enacted a staged cut in the interest rate that students have to pay. It goes from 6.8% to 3.4% over 5 years. Again, to try to make college loans more affordable. We increased the amounts of the Perkins grants, another form of student aid, and we did some other things, like we put a provision in the bill which prohibits anybody who's borrowed money. There's a limit of 15% of their income that they have to pay a student loan. Nobody can be required to pay more than 15% of their income in a student loan payment over the course of the year. So you can't be basically bankrupted by your student loan obligation. So we're working with a lot of things. Now, the other thing, and this, I'm sure that Ann will bring this up when she talks to you, because the talking point on the other side is, well, the College Cost Reduction Act has resulted in some students not being able to get loans. We cut, in order to pay for the College Cost Reduction Act, again, $21 billion, and we didn't want to increase the deficit. In order to pay for it, we cut by 0.45%, or 45 basis points, the interest rate that lenders can get under the subsidized loan program. So we took less than 0.5% away from their profit, making these student loans, which are guaranteed by the taxpayers. Anybody who tries to make the argument that 0.5% resulted in students not being able to get loans is not paying attention. But some of the Republicans are trying to say that that's the reason that this happened, because they don't want us to take credit for doing something which most Americans applaud. Anybody who's been paying attention knows that the overall credit markets in this country and throughout the world are in very critical shape. You have trouble getting a loan for anything right now. And the lenders, the credit resources for the student loan lenders have dried up. They've dried up, again, for homeowners, they've dried up for businesses, they've dried up for a lot of things. And students have been having a little bit more trouble getting loans, but it wasn't because of the College Cost Reduction Act. Meanwhile, the amount of aid that we've increased, again, 20% increase in the Pell Grants, increasing the Perkins Grants and so forth, cutting the interest rates, more than compensates for any of the reductions. So we think that we've done a good thing. We think the American people are overwhelmingly supportive of what we've done in the higher education area, and I'm particularly proud of my role in that. So that's higher ed. Elementary and secondary education is a true challenge for everybody. We spent about 8 months last year working on No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind, which is the unfortunate name of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. George Miller, who's my chairman on Education and Labor, says he thinks that it's up for renewal, by the way, or reauthorization. Nobody wants to renew it, or very few people do. Most people want to never think of it again. But unfortunately, we have to keep thinking of it. But George says, he said, whatever I come up with, that we come up with this in the committee, I know we'll get 100 more votes if we just change the name. Because No Child Left Behind has become such a dirty word. But there are a lot of problems with No Child Left Behind. But one of the main problems is that they set up first of all, let me say the goals of No Child Left Behind are really noble goals. I think everybody applauds them. The goal is make sure that no school system is allowed to ignore any category of student. That every student in a public school gets attention. Whether they're English as second language learners, whether they're special needs kids, whether they're minority kids, whatever. That's a noble goal. But what No Child Left Behind did was set up a mechanism of penalties for schools based on an arbitrary one-time-a-year exam that was really life or death for many schools. And what's even worse than that is the schools are judged not just how they improve a student, but how they do in teaching different groups of students over different years. In other words, you have to test fourth graders in every school, math and English, fourth graders, you get that score. The next year, your success or failure is based on how your fourth graders do on that test. It's not the same group of kids. So you may have, just like a coach with a team, you may have really bad players one year, and you may have really good players the next year, and your test scores are going to reflect that, even if you just do the same job. So this is one of the many great failings of No Child Left Behind. The other problem attendant to that is what has happened is schools have basically said, I got to get a certain number of students over this line. So I'm going to forget